Ignorance, the root of all suffering. Have you ever wondered why people keep chasing fame, money, love, yet in the end still don't feel satisfied? Why life is always filled with worries and sorrows even though we have tried our best to find happiness? Could there be something obscuring our view, preventing us from seeing the truth? In Buddhism, that obscuration is called ignorance. Ignorance is not simply ordinary ignorance or lack of knowledge. It is a state of delusion in which we fail to see the true nature of all things. When ignorance reigns, people easily mistake suffering for joy, impermanence for permanence, and the temporary for the real. Because of that, they wander in the cycle of birth and death, life after life, unable to find a way out. Understanding ignorance is an important step on the path to enlightenment. Only by recognizing it can we find a way to resolve it. The Buddha himself went through a long journey from ignorance to enlightenment. Born a prince, he lived amid royal palaces, enjoying every luxury and privilege. Yet once he witnessed birth, aging, sickness, and death, he suddenly realized that this world was rife with suffering. He renounced everything, left the palace, and embarked on a quest for truth. After 6 years of austere practice in the deep forest, enduring countless hardships, he finally broke through the darkness of ignorance under the Bodhi tree and awakened to the truth of life. He realized that all human suffering arises from our own delusions. From then on, he devoted his life to teaching the path out of ignorance, helping sentient beings rediscover peace in their hearts. Today, though times have changed, ignorance remains, creeping into every thought, every action. It drives us to pursue ephemeral things, causing us to suffer without understanding why. To understand ignorance is not to be fearful or discouraged, but to learn how to remove the layers that cloud our mind, to see clearly the true nature of life, and from there discover a path to peace. What is ignorance? Ignorance is the state of not seeing the truth veiled by illusions. In Buddhism, ignorance is not merely a lack of ordinary knowledge, but a thick veil that causes us to view the world incorrectly. It leads us to chase what is unreal, and then suffer precisely because of those things. In Pali, ignorance is called avijja, meaning lack of wisdom, not seeing correctly. This is the fundamental cause of suffering, the first link in the chain of the 12 links of dependent origination which keeps sentient beings in the cycle of birth and death. Ignorance prevents us from seeing the impermanence inherent in life. One may believe that fame and fortune bring lasting happiness, but in reality, everything is constantly changing. By clinging to such things, once they disappear, we suffer. Or one may believe that hatred can somehow make them stronger, but in truth, it only burdens the mind. In the Noble Eightfold Path, ignorance is the opposite of right view, which is the correct understanding. When someone has right view, they see the real nature of life, no longer misled by illusions. Right view helps us recognize that all things in life are impermanent, that birth inevitably leads to death. It helps us understand that suffering does not come from someone else, but from our own lack of clarity and insight. The Sutras record the Buddha's teaching. Not knowing about suffering, not knowing the cause of suffering, not knowing the cessation of suffering, and not knowing the path leading to the cessation of suffering, this is ignorance. When people do not understand that suffering is a part of life, they attempt to avoid reality only to end up in new kinds of suffering. When they do not understand that craving is the cause of suffering, they keep chasing desires, not realizing that these very cravings exhaust them. By understanding ignorance, we will see that all suffering in life is not arranged by anyone, but is the result of delusions in our own minds. If we want to change our life, we do not need to change the external world. We only need to change our way of seeing. Manifestations of ignorance in everyday life. Ignorance is not something distant. It manifests in every thought, word, and action. A person driven by greed may do all sorts of things to acquire wealth, yet upon acquiring it still feels unsatisfied. A person seized by anger may harbor hatred in their heart only to grow more miserable with each hateful thought. A person deluded by illusions may chase unattainable dreams, and when they finally wake up, realizes they have wasted a lifetime. Someone may believe that having a lot of money automatically brings happiness, yet there are countless wealthy people who can't find peace of mind. Someone may think doing whatever they want will bring joy, but then when all falls apart, they discover everything they pursued was just a fleeting dream. We often see others' mistakes but fail to realize our own lives are also bound up in ignorance. Have we ever questioned whether the beliefs and thoughts we cling to are truly correct? Have we ever looked back to see if our pains in life all stem from our own way of thinking? If, one day, we can pause for a moment and look deeply into our own minds, we may find that most of our troubles do not arise from the outside world, but from not truly understanding ourselves. Recognizing this might be a first step out of ignorance. The origin of ignorance. The 12 links of dependent origination. After understanding ignorance, one may ask, where does ignorance come from? Why do people remain lost in their own illusions, repeating the same mistakes over and over, suffering without realizing it? Like a never-ending night without a dawn, ignorance is not just a momentary lapse, but an ongoing cycle spanning multiple lifetimes. It does not arise randomly, but has deep roots, taking hold in each person's consciousness and influencing every thought, word, and deed. To understand it more clearly, we must return to the source and delve into the causes and conditions that create and sustain ignorance. Just as someone lost in the dark cannot find the light until they figure out why the darkness is there, we cannot eradicate ignorance without pinpointing its origin. So, where does ignorance come from? How does it form? And why does it have such a powerful grip on the human mind? Let us delve deeper into the source and nature of ignorance to see clearly why we are so often deluded and how we might find a way out of this darkness. Ignorance does not simply appear out of nowhere. It has a profound origin. It is not just a short-term lack of knowledge, but a link in the cycle of samsara, a chain of conditions drawing beings into birth and death. In Buddhist teaching, the 12 links of dependent origination serve as a map showing how this process works, with ignorance as the first link leading to all suffering. When you plant a seed in the ground, and it receives water, sunlight, fertile soil, it germinates, grows, and eventually bears fruit. Similarly, ignorance is the initial seed in the chain of conditions, pulling one link after another, forming an endless cycle of rebirth. The Buddha taught, from ignorance arises volitional formations. From volitional formations arises consciousness. From consciousness arises name and form. Then the 6 sense bases: contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, and finally old age and death. These 12 factors constitute the reality of samsara, which will continue forever if not understood. Let's see how they connect. 1. From ignorance arises volitional formations. When the mind lacks clarity, people act out of greed, anger, and delusion. Like a person stumbling around in the dark, their every step is misguided. Such actions do not vanish, but become seeds of karma that produce consciousness. 2. From volitional formations arises consciousness. Consciousness is the awareness or the imprint left in the mind by every action, whether good or bad. Every deed imprints on our consciousness. A person steeped in anger will have a mind full of anger. One obsessed with greed harbors constant longing. 3. From consciousness arises name and form. When reborn, consciousness links to a new body, forming a new being with a mental and physical component. The seeds of previous karma follow consciousness into the new birth. 4. From name and form arises the 6 sense bases. Once a being has a body, it develops 6 faculties: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. These are the channels through which consciousness connects to the external world. A child is born, then gradually sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches, and thinks. 5. From the 6 sense bases arises contact. With the six faculties, a being contacts the world. The eyes see forms, the ears hear sounds, the nose smells odors, the tongue tastes flavors, the body feels touch, and the mind thinks. Each contact leaves an impression in the mind and sparks further responses. 6. From contact arises feeling. With contact comes the emergence of feeling. Hearing pleasant words brings joy, criticism brings sadness. Pleasant experiences foster enjoyment. Unpleasant ones provoke discomfort. These feelings drive people into the grip of craving. 7. From feeling arises craving. When a pleasant feeling arises, we want to hold on to it forever. When an unpleasant feeling arises, we want to avoid it. Craving is the thirst, the desire born from sensations. Tasting delicious food makes us want more. Hearing praise, we want additional praise. Yet this craving is the root of suffering, as nothing lasts eternally. 8. From craving arises clinging. When desires become too strong, we try to hold on tightly. We cling to possessions, statuses, people, anything we believe is important. But the more we cling, the more we fear losing. The wealthy dread poverty, the famous dread being forgotten, the lover dreads losing love. Clinging is attachment to what is ephemeral, and such attachment fuels further karmic actions. 9. From clinging arises becoming. Becoming is continued existence in samsara, fruit of the attachments we hold. Good karma leads to rebirth in better conditions. Evil karma leads to more suffering. But be it good or bad, so long as there is ignorance, one cannot escape samsara and will remain adrift in the stream of birth and death. 10. From becoming arises birth. With karma, one is reborn. A new life begins. Again, passing through joys and sorrows, loves and hates, confusion and searching. Still mired in ignorance, we repeat the same mistakes, continuing to attach, to crave, to suffer. 11. From birth arises old age and death. Whatever is born must age, fall ill, and die. No matter how tightly we cling to life, we cannot hold it forever. All possessions will eventually be lost. When death comes, karma remains, and if ignorance has not been overcome, a new round of rebirth begins. Thus, ignorance is the starting point of the cycle of birth and death. When one cannot see the truth, one takes misguided actions. Those actions imprint on consciousness, shaping new existences, continuing endlessly. It's like walking in circles in a forest without a map, or living in ignorance without a path to freedom. Through understanding the 12 links of dependent origination, we realize that to escape suffering, we must look deeply into our own minds. To break the cycle, we cannot simply remove one link. We must return to the beginning and dissolve ignorance. Ignorance and the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, delusion. Ignorance is not just a darkened state of mind. It is also the root from which the 3 poisons arise. These 3 poisons are greed, hatred, and delusion, the flames that burn within us and lead us astray without our knowing. Like 3 fierce currents, greed makes us incessantly crave. Hatred scorches the heart with enmity, and delusion clouds the mind. They appear in every thought, word, and deed. Greed is a never-ending desire, the longing for more. When the mind is unclear, we believe accumulating more brings happiness. In reality, the more we hold on, the more anxious we become. A wealthy person lives in fear of losing money. A powerful person fears being overthrown. A lover tries to possess the beloved, turning love into imprisonment. Greed distracts us from appreciating what we already have, always pointing us towards something else. Hatred is the fire of anger, the resentment that arises when we fail to get what we desire. When clarity is lacking, we may believe anger makes us stronger. But in truth, the angrier we get, the more we suffer. Someone who hates another torments themselves with bitterness day in and day out. Someone who harbors revenge is perpetually locked in that negativity. Delusion is misunderstanding and confusion, the inability to see things as they are. A person living in delusion believes everything they see is the ultimate truth, yet in reality it is often just an illusion. One might chase fame, thinking it is happiness, only to feel empty upon acquiring it. One might be blinded by love, believing that attaining the beloved guarantees eternal happiness, only to realize it was just a dream when things inevitably change. Delusion keeps us from discerning right from wrong or recognizing what truly matters in life. Someone might think that fulfilling personal desires is always good, but they end up hurting themselves. Or they might think harboring hatred will make them feel powerful, not realizing that hatred itself is a prison. These three poisons do not come from outside. They arise within our own minds when ignorance holds sway. But with wisdom, we see they are nothing but clouds drifting through our consciousness. If we understand that greed can never bring real happiness, we stop chasing illusions. If we see that hatred only deepens our suffering, we learn to let go. If we recognize that delusion is just a fog, we seek the light of understanding. As stated in the Dhammapada, no fire is equal to greed, no shackles equal to hatred, no net equal to delusion. Once we realize this, we gain the means to remove those shackles and rediscover the peace inherent in our own minds. Ignorance and karmic retribution. Ignorance does not just cause deluded thinking, it leads us into deeds that create karma. When the mind lacks clarity, people act upon greed, anger, or delusion, often unaware of the consequences. Yet each thought, word, and deed is a seed that, however small, will eventually bear fruit. Karma is neither punishment nor reward. It is simply the natural result of what we sow. If one sows seeds of anger, one reaps suffering. If one sows seeds of greed, one remains perpetually entangled in endless wants. If one lives mired in delusion, one drifts through life without ever knowing what truly matters. Ignorance is the root of karma. By failing to see the real nature of things, people imagine their actions have no consequences, or that those consequences are unrelated to them. Yet everything arises from causes and conditions. Even the smallest act leaves its trace and matures over time. Someone who doesn't see impermanence clings to wealth and status, believing they can preserve such things forever. As a result, they may lie or harm others to hold on to them. But when fortune and fame inevitably fade, they are left with regret, sorrow, and anxiety. Someone who doesn't see that hatred is self-destructive nurses vengeance, fixating on payback for perceived wrongs. Yet by cultivating hatred, they end up the most tormented of all, always burning inside with rage. Someone who doesn't recognize that even emotions follow samsaric laws remains lost in romantic obsessions, certain that if they only keep someone at their side, they will never be lonely. But when circumstances change, they find themselves devastated, trapped in despair. Due to ignorance, people act on short-term impulses, unaware of their far-reaching karmic consequences. Karma does not simply vanish. An action might pass in a moment, but its imprint remains, waiting for the right conditions to bear fruit. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha taught, "Whoever lives in ignorance is forever bound by samsara." Deeds fueled by ignorance yield consequences not just in this life, but in future lives. It is like walking in total darkness, unaware of where we are headed. A famous example is Devadatta, a cousin of the Buddha. Early in life, he competed with the Buddha, jealous of his merits. When Siddhartha awakened to become the Buddha, Devadatta could not accept that his cousin was now revered while he remained ordinary. Driven by ambition, Devadatta tried to split the Sangha and seize disciples for himself. When that failed, anger and hatred prompted him to plot to kill the Buddha. He instigated wrongdoers to attack the Buddha, but they failed. Finally, he rolled a boulder from a hilltop, injuring the Buddha's foot. These evil acts bore karmic fruits. Devadatta soon fell gravely ill, tormented physically and mentally, and when he died, he fell into a woeful realm, taking with him the consequences of his actions. Devadatta's story clearly shows how ignorance spawns evil karma. Ignorance of the impermanence of worldly success pushes us to chase ambitions that bring no lasting fulfillment. Ignorance of hatred's self-destructiveness leads us to resentment that only deepens our suffering. Ignorance of karmic consequences allows us to continue harmful deeds that inevitably lead to sorrow. Karma does not vanish at death but continues through rebirth. A lifetime of greed becomes a habitual craving carried into the next existence. A lifetime of hate fosters repeated hostility. A lifetime of delusion perpetuates confusion. Karma is like a wheel that keeps spinning, so long as ignorance fuels it. Yet as surely as a lost traveler may find a path when a guiding light appears, we can unravel ignorance and change our destiny if we seek understanding. Karma can be changed. It is not fixed. If we transform ourselves, our karma transforms as well. Once we live with wisdom, ignorance gradually recedes, and as ignorance dissolves, we break free from the wheel of samsara. The consequences of ignorance. Ignorance is not an abstract concept. It is not confined to high philosophy or esoteric teachings, but manifests right here, in each moment of daily life. Since time immemorial, people have searched for happiness, yet we often feel unfulfilled. Some chase after wealth, power, and prestige. Others become infatuated with romantic love or sensual pleasures. But after achieving these, they still feel an emptiness, a persistent anxiety. That is the hallmark of ignorance. Ignorance is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is just a fleeting notion or a deeply ingrained habit. It could be misguided beliefs we never question, random bursts of anger, unexplained sadness, or insatiable desires we do not understand. So how does ignorance reveal itself in our everyday actions, words, and thoughts? How can we recognize it in the simplest aspects of daily life? Let us look deeper into ourselves to see how ignorance subtly influences us in each moment. Ignorance in thoughts. Thought is where ignorance is most deeply rooted. It infiltrates each fleeting idea and shapes our overall view of the world, defining what we consider right or wrong, and how we choose our path in life. When the mind is unclear, we easily cling to illusions, striving for what is unreal, confusing happiness and suffering. From birth, each person forms an image of themselves. Some believe they are exceptionally talented. Others are perpetually self-conscious. Some feel they are the center of the universe. Others regard themselves as insignificant. Whether self-confidence or self-doubt, if not grounded in true understanding, it is still a delusion. A wealthy person might think they are superior, but wealth alone does not define true human worth. A person who has failed might consider themselves worthless, yet every success has come from multiple failures. A popular individual might consider themselves important, yet as time passes, all that can change. We often identify ourselves with achievements, praise from others, or possessions we own or lack. But all these things are not our true essence. Whenever we become proud or despairing because of them, we are living in ignorance, clinging to an illusory self. The world is a ceaseless stream of causes and conditions. Everything is constantly changing, nothing stays forever, nothing remains unchanged. Yet, because of ignorance, we desperately want life to conform to our personal desires, wanting always to keep what we like and eliminate what we dislike. When reality fails to match our expectations, we suffer. We love youth, but time moves on. We want relationships to remain unchanged, but people's hearts can shift. We want to avoid suffering, but pain is part of life. Ignorance makes us see the world the way we want it to be, not as it truly is. Inevitably, we become frustrated when life diverges from our ideal. But reality does not revolve around any single individual. It follows its own laws. By understanding this, we will stop resenting life and blaming fate. We will cease clinging to the past or fearing the future. Everyone wants happiness, but happiness is often fleeting, while suffering seems everywhere. We might feel momentarily joyful when we get what we want, but then worry about losing it. We may love someone deeply only to dread when love changes. We may relish fame only to fear the day no one remembers us. Because of ignorance, we believe happiness lies somewhere out there. Yet, once reached, a new desire or worry emerges. We end up chasing illusions day after day, lifetime after lifetime, never truly catching happiness. Real happiness does not lie in external possessions, status, or even in having or not having something. It arises when the mind is clear and at peace, when we can appreciate what is in front of us, when we let go of needless desire. Yet most people fail to realize this, veiled by ignorance. No one wants pain, but it is unavoidable. Because of ignorance, we try to dodge it instead of understanding and accepting it. Some drown their sorrows in alcohol or entertainment, but when the buzz wears off, the sadness remains. Others blame fate or other people for their difficulties, never examining themselves. Still others feel utterly desperate when they lose something precious, never realizing that all things inevitably change. We see suffering as an enemy, but suffering can also be a teacher. Understanding suffering can help us appreciate what we have, strengthen our minds, and let go of what we cannot hold forever. But ignorance drives us to flee from pain, which in turn exacerbates it. By facing suffering and comprehending it, we transform it from a burden into a lesson that helps us grow. Consider a person who believes that if only they get more money, they will be happy. They devote their life to work, sacrificing everything. They get the wealth they want, but still feel uneasy. They fear losing it, suspect others' motives, and never have time to relax or enjoy simple moments of peace. Only after falling ill, spending sleepless nights in a hospital bed, do they realize money cannot buy back lost time or lost health. By then, their life has passed by. Unfortunately, this story is not rare. Ignorance in our thought process not only causes suffering, but also squanders our entire life. Without recognizing our misconceptions, we chase illusions endlessly, never finding true peace. Ignorance in speech. Words can be a cool breeze that comforts or a scorching fire that destroys. Each word we speak carries not just sound, but also intention, creating either wholesome or unwholesome karma. When ignorance shrouds our minds, we rarely grasp the power of speech. Under ignorance, we may utter harsh words, lies, or divisive speech, harming both others and ourselves. In daily life, no one can avoid hearing what others say. Praise may delight us, criticism may hurt, encouragement can uplift, condemnation can crush hope. But few realize that our own words also forge our destiny. In the Sutta Nikaya, the Buddha taught, words born of ignorance lead to suffering. When unmindful, we carelessly speak, sowing seeds of suffering for others and eventually ourselves. Words can cut deeper than knives. Though they leave no mark on the body, they inflict wounds on the heart. When ignorance overshadows us, hatred steers our speech. We hurl insults, hurl curses, shame others, oblivious to the consequences. Words once said cannot be taken back. A single outburst of anger can scar the listener for life. Even if remorse comes later, the pain remains. Harsh words do not merely hurt the target, they reflect the speaker's own inner turmoil. Habitual cruelty in speech betrays a mind full of rage and bitterness. Constant criticism shows a lack of compassion. Yet, under ignorance, one does not see that each outburst tightens anger's grip on their own heart. Some people think belittling others enhances their self-image, but in reality it only reveals the speaker's pettiness. False speech is also born of ignorance. Some lie for personal gain, others because they fear facing truth. Some become so accustomed to illusions that they lose all sense of what is real. The one who deceives others eventually entangles themselves in their own web of lies. Someone who lies for profit or influence will find that trust crumbles once the truth emerges. Someone who spins tales for attention can end up mired in their own fabrications. Deception not only harms others, but also does irreversible damage to the deceiver's sense of integrity and self-respect. Beyond lies or insults, there is another destructive form of speech, sowing discord and division. A seemingly harmless remark can pit friends against each other or spark distrust within a family. Jealousy might lead someone to hint that others harbor ill will, triggering misunderstandings and breaking bonds. Ignorance blinds us to the power of words. Jealousy, greed, fear, any of these can color our speech with negativity. We rarely consider long-term repercussions, focusing on momentary impulses. Yet every single word has consequences, and once spoken, it cannot be undone. In the Buddha's time, the ascetic Sundari was manipulated into slandering the Buddha. She pretended to be a disciple, then spread false rumors about inappropriate behavior, shaking the faith of some onlookers. Eventually, her deceit was exposed, and those who had incited her turned against her. The truth shone through, reinforcing people's reverence for the Buddha, while the slanderers faced their own downfall. This story illustrates that harmful words driven by ignorance can hurt others, but ultimately return to harm the speaker. A lie might last for a while, but truth cannot be hidden forever. Words that cause suffering also chain the speaker to a life of agitation. Speech is powerful. If it comes from compassion and mindfulness, it promotes harmony and joy for everyone. But if ignorance rules our speech, we invite sorrow for ourselves, entangling ourselves in the negativity we express. Ignorance in action. Every action we take leaves a mark, never vanishing entirely. When ignorance clouds the mind, we act heedlessly, oblivious to karmic repercussions. From a single misguided thought or careless word to a harmful deed, all can have dire consequences. Some actions seem like trivial choices in a fleeting moment, yet they may alter one's destiny. We may act out of greed or hatred, or become swept up in delusion, harming ourselves and those around us. Many yearn to avoid suffering, yet ignorance prods them to commit more harmful deeds. We forget that all beings treasure their own lives as we treasure ours. Failing to see that all beings fear pain, some engage in killing, whether for food, profit, entertainment, or habit, never considering the karmic seeds they sow. A person might kill animals for luxurious food, or for profit, or simply out of habit, not realizing the terror and agony they cause. Suffering leaves imprints in the stream of karma, which will inevitably yield results. Some who sustain themselves by killing live haunted in old age by nightmares, illnesses, or intense fear. The seeds of cruelty do not disappear. They often sprout in the form of retribution. Others think that having more possessions will guarantee happiness. Lacking moral scruples, they take what isn't theirs. Under ignorance, they fail to realize that ill-gotten gains cannot be kept forever. Even if they temporarily succeed, they lose their inner peace, living in constant fear of exposure. Eventually, conditions shift, and they may themselves be robbed, cheated, or betrayed, tasting the fruits of their own deeds. When people don't understand the dangers of passion or lust, they enter improper relationships. Perhaps they cheat on a faithful partner or disturb someone else's marriage. They believe fleeting pleasure is worth it, unaware they are sowing heartbreak for all involved. Ignorance makes them see love as a game. Yet once illusions crumble, trust is shattered, leaving lifelong regrets. Others, lacking purpose, sink into trivial pursuits or addictions, from drinking to drugs. They think these will solve their troubles, but such habits only deepen ignorance. Lost in intoxication, they lose clarity of mind, repeatedly making poor decisions. They ruin their health, family, and careers, still failing to see the link to ignorance. A single reckless choice can uproot an entire life. Yet, under ignorance, people often repeat the same harmful patterns, only realizing the severity after irreparable damage has been done. An example is a man who once lived a life of wrongdoing, drinking, gambling, cheating. He lost family, friends, health. Eventually, he visited a temple. There, a monk spoke of cause and effect, of ignorance, of how each person forges their own suffering. The man realized it was not life that was cruel, but his own choices. He saw that everything sprang from his own actions. From that day, he changed. He quit drinking and gambling, found honest work, reconciled with those he had hurt. Gradually, he found peace. If he had not heard those teachings, he might have continued in ignorance, lost forever in misery. His story mirrors countless others trapped in destructive patterns. Yet by pausing to reflect, by listening to wisdom, they can reorient their lives. Ignorance leads to repeated harmful actions that entangle us in suffering. But if we recognize our mistakes, we can step onto the path of transformation. Karma is shaped by our minds. When we change internally, we begin dissolving the conditions that perpetuate wrongdoing. Ignorance and the cycle of samsara. Ignorance is not confined to thoughts, speech, or deeds. It shapes the very structure of our existence. Each careless word or action guided by ignorance leaves karmic imprints that produce suffering for ourselves and others. This suffering extends beyond a single lifetime, fueling the wheel of samsara. Whenever ignorance drives us, we create new karma, and when karma ripens, we face its consequences. Why do some people seem perpetually unlucky? Why do some, despite their best efforts, remain mired in hardships? Why do some cause harm and yet appear unscathed, at least for now? Is life unfair? Or is there a deeper, hidden cause and effect at play? Ignorance not only leads us astray, but also keeps us bound to the effects of our actions. Suffering arises seemingly from nowhere, or we fall back into old mistakes across lifetimes. Unless we understand this system of cause and consequence, we remain adrift, never finding the shore. By probing the results of ignorance, we see the pattern it weaves in our lives. Only then can we unravel it at its root. For centuries, people have sought happiness. The more they chase it, the emptier they feel. Some think happiness lies in money, power, or reputation. Others crave a fulfilling relationship. Still others harbor hatred, believing revenge will bring them peace. Yet after achieving these things, they remain restless and anxious. Ignorance is the true cause of all these sorrows. The second noble truth states, all suffering arises due to ignorance. Not seeing clearly, we chase after impermanent goals and suffer their loss. Not understanding ourselves, we let greed and anger rule, turning our lives into a battlefield of mental turmoil. Not realizing karma operates unerringly, we blame fate or others while sowing our own seeds of misery. Ignorance harms not only individuals but societies at large. It breeds conflict, distrust, social injustice, even war. A mind unable to grasp the interconnectedness of life easily succumbs to envy, cruelty, and hostility. Families break apart over trivial misunderstandings. Friendships collapse over suspicion. Nations wage war out of greed or revenge, perpetuating mass suffering. Many agonies come from within. A person who always wants more never finds contentment. A person consumed by hatred lives in constant fear. A person steeped in delusion makes misguided choices, compounding their troubles. One might assert, if I only had more money, I'd be happy. Yet upon attaining wealth, they live in fear of losing it, never satisfied. Another thinks, if I could avenge this wrong, I'd be at peace. But vengeance does not soothe the heart. Hatred erodes our well-being. Others suppose, if I found perfect love, I'd be eternally happy. only to despair when love inevitably changes. Because of ignorance, we place our hope in external, impermanent things. We do not realize that genuine happiness stems from a calm, insightful mind free from attachments. Even if we gain what we desire, it is fleeting. Clinging to illusions, we become restless and distressed once they shift or vanish. Suffering extends beyond individuals to entire societies when collective ignorance predominates. If greed, envy, and distrust prevail, conflicts arise. Jealousy prompts us to harm others, failing to see we harm ourselves. Anger spurs violence, sowing seeds of future retaliation. Humanity's history, with its endless wars, is a testament to collective ignorance. But if one truly sees that all is impermanent, there is no need to mourn what is lost. If we understand that hatred is self-destructive, we endeavor to forgive. If we accept no one is flawless, we learn tolerance and compassion. Under ignorance, however, we fail to see these truths. We focus only on desire and frustration, forgetting the precious gifts we already have, or that sorrow is part of life's fabric. Ignorance spawns suffering, yet we are not doomed to ignorance forever. If we observe ourselves with clarity and examine the workings of our own minds, we come to see that suffering arises from within. When we let go of greed, we find contentment. When we abandon hatred, peace blossoms. When we stop feeding delusions, the path ahead becomes bright. Yes, all suffering originates in ignorance, but ignorance can be overcome. Just as the dawn dispels night, wisdom dispels ignorance. As the lost traveler finds their way with a map, we too can walk a new path. Ignorance forges the cycle of samsara, but suffering itself can awaken us to reality. We can emerge on the other side when we realize we cannot change the external world, but we can transform ourselves. When we do, our entire world changes with us. Ignorance in samsara. The example of King Ashoka. Throughout countless lives, we revolve in samsara, the cycle of birth and death, without remembering why we keep returning. Some are born in privilege, others in poverty. Some have good fortune, others perpetual adversity. Some lead good lives yet face hardships. Others do wrong yet seem temporarily unscathed. Does an external fate mandate such outcomes? Or is it the unfolding of causes and conditions we ourselves have sown? Ignorance not only leads us down the wrong paths, but keeps us shackled to the results of our actions. Suffering and rebirth are intertwined. Ignorance leads to karmic misdeeds. These deeds eventually ripen. Then we continue in samsara, carrying unresolved patterns from past lives. A person who lives a life of greed will find themselves in future existences similarly driven by endless cravings. A person consumed by hatred in one life may carry that bitterness into the next. A person immersed in delusion will be reborn into conditions that perpetuate confusion. We act blindly, and these unskillful seeds shape our next life, perpetuating the cycle. A prime example is King Ashoka, one of India's greatest rulers. Early in his reign, he was ignorant and ruthless, waging wars to expand his empire. In his conquest of Kalinga, countless people perished, cities burned, families were devastated. Standing on the battlefield amidst corpses and wails of survivors, King Ashoka felt hollow. He realized all his power and lands could not fill his spiritual emptiness. Ashoka sought a new path, turned to the Buddha's teachings, and discovered the truths of karma and ignorance. He recognized that his brutal conquests entailed grievous karmic consequences. Ashoka abandoned war, embraced the Dharma, and dedicated himself to spreading Buddhism, building temples, and promoting compassionate governance. Had he never glimpsed the horror on the battlefield, never awakened to the reality of suffering, he might have continued in ignorance, fueling wars without end. This story shows how ignorance can lead even the mightiest astray, but with a single moment of insight, one can transform. Ignorance perpetuates samsara, but no one is fated to remain ignorant forever. By looking into our own minds, we see our faults and can change. A once greedy person can learn generosity. A once hateful person can cultivate forgiveness. A once deluded person can seek light. Samsara is not a prison, but a path. When walked in ignorance, it becomes an endless maze. But armed with wisdom, we can find the exit and transcend our self-made suffering. Ignorance and karmic retribution in the present. Why are some people blessed from birth, while others suffer incessantly? Some live kindly but face calamities. Others commit wrongdoing yet seem to live lavishly. Is life inherently unjust? According to Buddhism, nothing arises at random. All we experience today is the fruit of past deeds, our own karma. Karma is not imposed by any deity or by destiny. It is simply the natural consequence of what we do. People ignorant of this principle keep creating new karma, unaware that every action bears its own results. They suppose their choices are trivial, yet everything is recorded, no action is lost. The teachings on karma states, everything people do, no matter how small, produces corresponding results. A single drop of water does not fill a river, but many drops over time create an ocean. One wrongful act may not yield immediate repercussions, but repeated wrongdoing accumulates, eventually forming a heavy karmic burden. Karma arises not from occasional missteps, but from repetitive patterns. Under ignorance, people repeat harmful behaviors, unaware that they are forging their own chains. Telling one lie opens the door to more lies, eroding one's sense of truth. One burst of anger can lead to frequent outbursts until rage becomes second nature. A moment of greed can become an unbridled obsession. Ignorance blinds us to long-term consequences. We chase fleeting gains, illusions of pleasure, or vent emotional impulses, not realizing that every action leaves an indelible mark on consciousness. Like one trudging into a muddy swamp, the more we advance, the deeper we sink. By the time we want to retreat, we're stuck. Some speak only falsehoods their whole life, so no one believes them when they finally tell the truth. Others commit so many transgressions that, when they want to reform, karma has matured and the chance is gone. People clinging to revenge cannot let go even after achieving it, remaining trapped in hatred's cycle. Ignorance yields many karmic stains. Some affect only ourselves, others harm many people or even future generations. Greed leads us to crave ever more, never content. Anger traps us in animosity, harming both others and ourselves. Delusion blinds us, causing endless mistakes. A person who's lived entirely for material gain discovers late in life that no amount of possessions can bring enduring peace. Another who's lived in hatred finds themselves forever anxious and embittered. Those caught in illusions realize they've never grasped what truly matters. Karma does not vanish. It waits for the right time to ripen. Someone may think they have avoided the consequences, but the seeds remain until the moment is ripe. The Kinyipo, Discourses on Karma, teaches that we cannot flee from our deeds. They follow us like shadows. Yet we also hold the power to shape those deeds. If we stop and reflect, if we choose differently, karma can transform. When ignorance prevails, we keep creating harmful karma without seeing how we are trapping ourselves. Yet if we awaken, we can alter our course. Good deeds replace bad. Old misdeeds can be mitigated or even purified through sincere remorse, reparation, and sustained ethical living. Like a murky pond that settles into clarity if left undisturbed, like a burnt forest that can regrow if seeded anew, our fate can change when we do. How to eradicate ignorance. Ignorance is like darkness enveloping our minds, causing us to chase illusions and suffer. Because of it, we never question our insatiable appetites, resentments, and delusions. We repeat the same karmic cycles, lifetime after lifetime, never finding release. Yet in the midst of this darkness, there is always a lamp that can guide us. Just as darkness cannot remain where light appears, ignorance cannot persist in the presence of true wisdom. No matter how much karma we have created or how long we have wandered, only a single moment of true insight can illuminate the path. So how do we destroy ignorance? How do we break samsara's chains and stop reaping the results of our own misdeeds? Which path leads to enlightenment and peace right here and now? If ignorance is the root of suffering, wisdom is the way out. If ignorance turns the wheel of samsara, wisdom opens the door to liberation. Let us explore how to uproot ignorance, how to kindle that lamp so that darkness has nowhere to hide, how each of us can discover light right within this life. Overcoming ignorance through right view, the Noble Eightfold Path. Ignorance is the darkness clouding the mind so we cannot see the truth, yet even the thickest darkness is dispelled by a single flame. In Buddhism, wisdom is that flame, the only light that can destroy ignorance and allow us to see the true path. In the Noble Eightfold Path, right view is the first step, the portal that opens so we can begin to free ourselves from illusion. With right view, we see things without the filters of greed, hatred, or delusion. We comprehend how suffering arises and how it can end. We recognize that everything happiness, suffering, and the law of cause and effect originates in our own mind. As taught in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, one who has right view understands impermanence, understands cause and effect, and understands the path to well-being. Once the mind sees clearly, ignorance has no refuge, like shadows fleeing before the rising sun. The Noble Eightfold Path is the way to leave samsara and realize enlightenment. It consists of 8 practices guiding us to purify body, speech, and mind, culminating in wisdom that dispels ignorance. Among these 8, right view is foundational. Right view means seeing things as they truly are, free of false perceptions. An ignorant person believes life is fixed and unchanging. They cling to what is impermanent. When it inevitably shifts, they suffer. They blame misfortunes on external forces or others, never recognizing their own mind as source. But with right view, we realize everything is dependent on conditions. Good deeds bring favorable results. Harmful deeds bring suffering. No one can alter our destiny except us through our choices and behaviors. The Four Noble Truths, clearly seeing suffering, its cause, and its cessation. If we lack right view, we see only suffering without understanding its cause. We lament our fate, resent others, or imagine we are victims. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths to help us see that suffering is not random or permanent. Suffering has causes, and if there is a cause, there is also a remedy. All beings want happiness, yet life seems saturated with dissatisfaction. A moment of joy is often followed by anxiety about losing it. Love can turn to heartbreak. Fame can vanish abruptly. The Buddha realized that everything that arises must pass away. We cannot cling to youth, to health, to relationships, or to life itself. They all transform. Unaware of this truth, we keep trying to secure them forever, leading to frustration and distress. He also realized that craving is the root cause of suffering. We always want, never feeling satisfied. As soon as we attain one desire, new longings arise or fear creeps in about losing what we have. If we cannot get what we want, we feel miserable. If suffering has a cause, we can remove it. By extinguishing craving and letting go of blind attachment, we can find peace. A person can be rich but remain untroubled if they do not cling to their possessions. Another might have little yet feel content if they do not yearn beyond their means. It is not having or not having that matters, but whether the mind is still ensnared by illusions. When we let go of craving, suffering dissolves. Yet simply knowing the cause of suffering does not suffice. We must walk the path leading out of suffering, and that path is the Noble Eightfold Path. By cultivating right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, we gradually end ignorance and cultivate wisdom. Meditation, calming the mind, uprooting ignorance. Ignorance is like a veil of fog that prevents us from seeing clearly. When the mind is unsettled, we are easily pulled by greed, anger, and delusion. But just as a muddy pond becomes clear if left undisturbed, when the mind is stilled, insight naturally arises, dissolving ignorance. Meditation is the way to settle the mind. When not entangled by restless thoughts, wisdom shines through. The Buddha taught that only with a tranquil mind can we perceive truth. Just as a mirror reflects clearly when still, we see reality when our consciousness is steady. In daily life, the mind rarely stops churning. We think of past regrets, future anxieties, fleeting joys and sorrows. True meditation training teaches us to pause, watch, and let thoughts come and go, rather than chasing or resisting them. Through such practice, we discover that thoughts are like clouds drifting across the sky, transient and insubstantial. Many of life's struggles do not arise from external events, but from our ceaseless mental chatter. Meditation helps us observe the nature of these thoughts and calm our turbulent minds. Once we stop fueling negative patterns, deeper clarity emerges. In the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha described focusing on the breath as a straightforward gateway to mindfulness. By simply being aware of each inhalation and exhalation, knowing when the breath comes in and when it goes out, our minds stop wandering. Gradually, the breath slows and steadies, calming the mind. In that calm, we discover that the worries and attachments that seem so pressing may be illusory. Meditation is not an escape from life's problems, but a direct method of looking inward. As insight grows, we recognize impermanence and interdependence in all things. We see that real peace comes from letting go, not from possessing. Thus, meditation dissolves ignorance by illuminating our inner world. One man who had worried his entire life about the future tried meditating. At first, he thought it useless. But as he persisted, watching his breath, he realized much of his stress stemmed from mental projections rather than actual threats. By staying present, he felt more at ease, discovering genuine peace for the first time. Ignorance cannot be destroyed by argument alone. We must experience clarity within. Meditation is a practical path to do so. By bringing the wandering mind back to the present, we gradually let go of illusions, enabling wisdom to arise. Once wisdom shines, ignorance has nowhere to linger. Studying sutras, listening to teachings, a guiding light. Ignorance is a curtain veiling the truth, causing us to confuse what is fleeting for what is permanent. We mistake suffering for happiness and illusions for reality. Yet, as a wanderer lost in the forest needs a guide, we need guidance to remove these delusions. The sutras and the Buddha's teachings serve as that light, pointing out our suffering's cause and the path to freedom. By studying the sutras and listening to Dharma talks, we gain not just knowledge, but the chance to self-reflect, to see why we suffer and how to transform it. Someone mired in ignorance blames life for their misery, never suspecting their own unending desires. But once they read about impermanence, suffering, and the end of suffering, they start to question their assumptions. Hearing the Dharma can spark a sudden awakening. One short teaching on impermanence can entirely reshape our perspective. A story about compassion can move us to let go of hatred. The teachings are like a compass in the dark. In the Buddha's time, the Venerable Sariputta was widely revered for his extraordinary wisdom. Yet before meeting the Buddha, he too wandered among various philosophies. One day, encountering a monk named Assaji, Sariputta heard a brief verse on dependent origination. Instantly, he understood. All phenomena arise from causes. When their causes cease, they also cease. This insight dispelled his doubts and led him to the Buddha, where he became the foremost disciple in wisdom. His story shows how even the most earnest seeker can remain lost until a single phrase from the teachings lights the way. Some read sutras without comprehension or listen to Dharma but pay no heed. Yet for anyone sincerely searching for truth, the Sutras are a priceless treasure. The Buddha's words reflect the reality of our own experiences, greed, hatred, delusion, and the means to be free of them. Hence, studying sutras and attending Dharma talks is a potent way to dispel ignorance. They awaken us to what truly matters, stirring a transformation within. No longer do we wander blindly. Like travelers guided by a lamp, we can safely journey toward wisdom and peace. Living mindfully, chipping away at ignorance day by day. Ignorance is not abstract. It appears in our everyday thoughts, speech, and actions, entangling us in constant strife without our knowing. But as darkness yields to light, ignorance fades when we cultivate mindfulness, a clear awareness of each moment. Living mindfully is not about leaving everything behind to retreat to a forest. It simply means paying full attention to our inner processes, pausing before we act, recognizing our thoughts and emotions as they arise. When we can observe ourselves, we are no longer unconsciously driven. We often spend days fretting about the future or regretting the past, scarcely present in the here and now. Ignorance thrives in this mental chaos. To reduce it, we practice observing our thoughts. When a negative thought surfaces, we notice it without letting it carry us away. Recognizing these thoughts is already the start of mindful living. Speech can uplift or destroy. Under ignorance, we speak harshly or deceitfully before we even realize it. Mindful speech means pausing to consider what we are about to say, ensuring our words contribute positively to ourselves and others. Actions can be destructive if fueled by fleeting impulses. Mindful living involves pausing to reflect on the potential consequences of what we do. When eating, we are fully aware of eating. When walking, we are fully aware of walking. When working, we are fully aware of working. In this way, we cease to be absent-minded, and ignorance loses a foothold. Anger is a prime sign of ignorance. When enraged, we see nothing but our grievance. Mindfulness allows us to recognize anger as it arises. We do not suppress it, but neither do we indulge it. We simply acknowledge. Anger is present. Why is it here? Slowly, anger loses its power. Practicing loving, kindness, and compassion also helps. By placing ourselves in others' shoes, we learn empathy and let go of resentment. Right mindfulness is the most direct way to escape ignorance. Present in each moment, we are not ensnared by past or future illusions. We stay connected to what we do. Eating, we savor each bite. Walking, we enjoy each step. Working, we do our best wholeheartedly. Listening to someone, we listen attentively. This genuine presence prevents ignorance from controlling us. A man once filled with anger was constantly suspicious after being betrayed. By chance, he heard the saying, "Holding on to anger is like picking up a hot coal to throw at someone else. You're the one who gets burned first." Realizing that hatred only tormented him, he began practicing mindfulness every time anger arose, loosening anger's grip. Over time, he transformed into a calmer, kinder person. A woman dissatisfied with her modest home and income always wanted more. One day she read, "Happiness is not found in having much, but in knowing what is enough." She realized that insatiable longing was her true source of pain. By practicing mindful appreciation of what she already had, she discovered genuine contentment. A young man once lost in aimless pleasures heard a talk about mindfulness. He realized if he didn't learn presence, life would slip away meaninglessly. From then on, he practiced focusing wholeheartedly on each daily activity. Gradually, he found life richer and more purposeful, no longer frittered away in distractions. Being mindful is not difficult. We can start with small steps. Each time we pause and observe ourselves, we weaken ignorance's hold. Ignorance is the root of suffering, but like darkness that vanishes at sunrise, it cannot remain when mindfulness shines. Conclusion: ignorance is the root of all suffering, but just as darkness yields to light, ignorance dissipates when we kindle the lamp of wisdom. By examining ourselves, our thoughts, words, and actions, we gradually emerge from delusion. Through practicing right view, contemplating the Four Noble Truths, meditating, studying the Sutras, and living mindfully, we can transform ourselves, break old habits formed over countless lifetimes, and dissolve ignorance at its core. Eradicating ignorance is not an instant event, but a continuous process. Each moment of mindfulness, each correct thought, each wholesome deed is a step toward the light. Ultimately, what truly matters is not how much we know intellectually, but how much we apply in our everyday life. When we shift our perspective, live with clarity, and act in accordance with compassion and wisdom, ignorance has nowhere to hide, and we are no longer imprisoned by needless suffering. Reflecting on our journey, we see that ignorance need not be permanent. Every person harbors an innate capacity for wisdom if only we open our minds, set aside outdated ways, and step onto the correct path. When the light of wisdom is ignited, not only are we freed from ignorance, but the entire world around us also grows brighter.